Okay, let's get going today. Sorry for the delay. I'm trying to record these lectures and push them out on the online course or on Blackboard, so you can listen to them later, because that's what you want to spend your weekends doing, listening to me. So. Yeah, so by in 2 weeks I'll be sitting here lecturing to myself every week. That sounds good. So, right, yeah, and I know, take care. All right, 2 of us. Today we're going to look, and this week we're going to look at fragments and how fragments work. So fragments are a processing unit that we'll be using that is less than an activity, and it can be managed by an activity. So again, you can have an activity, and it can be controlling and working with a fragment. The term fragment comes from a fragment of the user interface that you can have. So a couple ways we'll set up our screen. So our layouts might have a single fragment on a layout. So I have a layout there. We'll have an currently we have an activity tied to a layout. That's what we have right now. So now we're sticking this fragment in between. So we have an activity that'll work with a fragment, and a fragment could be stuck on a layout. Now if we have a larger layout, then we can have multiple fragments. So it's possible to have multiple fragments on a layout and work with multiple fragments on a layout in different ways. So a typical way would be if you had a small phone layout, you could have a couple activities and fragments. Maybe you had 2 activities and 2 different fragments, so that when you switched from one to the other, you just have certain stuff displayed, and then maybe you display detailed information and you have more stuff displayed. So you'd have 2 different fragments, and you'd have 2 different layouts for those ones.
So fragments, what's going to be on the layout?
Yeah, we'll stick a fragment on a layout, kind of, or kind of in the same way that we tie activities to layouts also. And what we'll work on now, well, again, you might have a small screen, but then maybe if you have a layout for a tablet, you'll say, I want to map 2 layouts to that, and you'll create that. Now, in doing this, we'll actually have 2 XML, well, we'll have an XML file often for the fragment. So we'll have a fragment layout, and then we'll have the main layout. And often the only thing in the main layout will be the fragment. And same here, this layout might have 3 things. It'll have maybe a main layout, it'll have a fragment 1 layout, and it'll have a fragment 2 layout. So we might, where before we saw just a single layout screen, and again, I guess when we had multiple activities, we had two layouts. Now we'll have the main layout. That will contain fragments, and in our fragment layouts will actually contain the widgets, the controls that we're working on. So this just gives us a way of grouping a bunch of controls together that are related, putting them like, again, in a fragment of the user interface, and then saying, okay, now we'll stick this fragment here and this fragment here, and then our activities can tie into those, and our activities will actually tie in with Java code. So we'll have our main activity.java. And we might, so the fragment stuff might be inside. Again, we'll have Java associated with this, with these fragments. Initially, it'll be inside the same activity class. So all this will be inside. Yeah, let's just do a different color. So we'll have our main activity.java file that'll include fragment classes within it to start with. Although with a fuller application with bigger fragments, you would break these up in their own files. It's kind of like when you're in Java 1, the first time we learn objects, we often declared a class, the main class, and another class inside there. And even now, we're often doing anonymous classes inside our main class to do button handling and that sort of stuff. So initially, we'll have just one, we might have one main activity with fragments declared inside that same file. But again, once we get to larger code bases, these will be separated out often into their own files. So to see this, we're going to start our Android Studio, and we're going to open a new project. And now we're going to not choose just a blank project. We're going to choose a blank project with fragments. So I'm going to go down here, New Android Studio Project. So I'm just going to give it some name, like this is just going to be our blank fragment example, nothing too fancy. So and again, we can just leave the initial SDK, the minimum SDK the same. It's not important at this point. But here we want to make sure we switch to this one again. So we're going to have a layout here, and then they're going to lay out a fragment inside that layout. So that's what we're going to try, is this version. Now, once we get started here, we'll be able to look at some of these other ones. So there are some other classes down here, like these master flow classes, and this is getting more popular here. Let's scroll down. That is the tabbed activities, where you have your screen and then you can just swipe left or right to get to a new screen. So it says it's tabbed. It's not really, I mean, tabbed is usually, we used to have that interface where there's tabs you can click on, and that really doesn't work on the phone. So the tabs are implied, and you just swipe left or right to get to the different activities. But again, these more complicated interfaces are built with fragments. So we've got to get to there before we can kind of understand those. And so we're going to start with this just blank activity with a fragment. Hit next. So again, our activity is called, it's going to be called main activity, right? Our layout is going to be activity main. Oops, I wrote that wrong. Not main layout. This is going to be called activity main. So that's the main layout. There's going to be a layout for the fragment. And again, it should be called fragment main here. So again, we'll have two layouts, one inside the other, two XML files, and then this main activity Java code here. That looks good. We won't change any of those names. Just say finish and wait for this to create. I kill something here. I got an issue with the program, so. There. Okay, so now we should see two layout files, fragment.main and activity.main. So fragment.main should be here, and it should look just like our kind of our old layout where we have a relative layout, we have a text view. This is kind of what you're working with. But again, you are just working with a fragment inside that'll be used inside another area, inside another class. I mean, another XML file. I'm going to add, let's just add some text. I just want it to say main fragment here so we can keep track of it. When I created it, somehow it created the same IDs in both, so mine's not displaying, so let's just see. There. If yours doesn't display, make sure you look in the code. They should have different ID tags, and for some reason when I created the second text view there, it gave it the same ID tag as my first one. So just make sure they have separate ID tags if you don't see them. Again, when I dragged it out there, it just disappeared. So, okay, so I have my main. So that's my fragment underscore main.xml. Let's look at activity main.xml and see what's in that. So this activity looks blank, and if I look at the text view, it is basically just blank. So it has a frame layout here. It doesn't really do anything. So our main activity tag isn't doing anything now, and what we'll do is we'll place the fragment in here in code. So this main activity is basically just a blank activity. No, the layout is just like a blank layout. So let's go look at your text here. Yeah. So you're probably going to have to shut it down and restart it again then. Okay, so our main activity main.xml is blank because again, everything we want to do is going to be in our fragment.main. So when we're working with these, we won't be using these activity mains. We'll be working with the fragments, and if we have another fragment, we might have two fragment layouts. And we'll put things in there, not in our main layout. Go. Ready to look at the Java code for this? So the Java code is pretty well, for the main activity, seems like it's the same. We have an onCreate state here. We're doing something with activities here, so we'll look at that in just a sec. Now, there's still a couple menu options here. I'm going to delete the two on mine just so you can see it. These two override menu things, just to kind of simplify this. And we can get it all on one screen here. So I've got, again, my main activity class, which extends, here. And then inside that class, I have a fragment class for my fragment. Right now it's called placeholder fragment, and it extends the fragment class. Okay, so that is my code that runs for my fragment and sets that up. Now, we'll talk about this this code will be used. So that's, again, this fragment class is this Java thing, and right now it's inside our main activity.java. But again, sometimes we'll pull that off into its own file. But we have an activity, so we have the main and then we have the fragment, both defined in this class. We have two classes here, one inside the other. Now, in our onCreate, we set up this fragment. So first you have to, fragments have not been around all the time. So like back in Android 2, 2.3, 2.4, we did not have fragments. Started with Android 3. Android 3 really wasn't used anywhere. It was kind of created for some tablets and stuff, but not many places implemented Android 3. So once we got Android 4, then that's when fragments really became used. So Android 4.2, 4.4, so that's relatively new stuff. So there's a lot of phones out there that don't support fragments without a library. So what you can do is you can create your app and you can add in a library that will add support to fragments for older phones with a special library in them. So I'm not going to go over in the details how to set that up. We're not going to necessarily worry about that. We'll just worry about right now creating Android fragments for modern computers. But just so you know, if you are doing fragment programming in the real world, you want to learn how to add these libraries. And again, you can just, there's a lot of tutorials that walk you through how to grab the Android library, drag it into create a library folder in your project and drop it in there, the jar file, and set it up. It's not that complicated. We just don't want to go into that complicated stuff right in this class. So that's what this is checking, is just, does our phone support fragments? So we're going to check if we have a fragment manager support. We're going to grab that fragment manager. So the fragment manager, again, handles all of our fragments. We're going to begin a transaction, and we're going to do add a fragment, and then we're going to commit. Commit says kind of run or set up that fragment. So this fragment, the name of this has to match the class name down here. So we're creating a new fragment object, and that has to match our class name down here. So that's why it says placeholder fragment here and placeholder fragment here. So this is creating a new object of this type, and then committing it will run it, will execute or create that fragment. It actually schedules it and asks it to be created as soon as possible through some scheduling stuff, because there might be other things going on the phone. I'm not going to go too much detail on the commit. I don't even know how it works. I just know that's what you do. So, okay, so let's look at this placeholder fragment. It extends fragment. We have a constructor, and again, we can do some initialization stuff in the constructor. Currently, we're not doing anything. And then the onCreate. Similarly, onCreate here, this onCreate will be run when our fragment is created. And so what we're going to do is we're going to place our fragment layout inside our main, and run that main layout. So inflators are what kind of create these interfaces, and so we create and inflate these layouts. So basically, what we say, if we want to put a layout someplace and display it on the screen, we use an inflator to do that. So we're going to use this inflate command, and then we're going to specify our fragment layout main. So r.layout.fragment main. So that is this this layout within our main layout that we're going to run, and then we just return that view. So that'll basically all this says is create in our layout, and so this name has to match our fragment main here for our layout. This kind of, you can see the mapping of the layouts to this. So here's our set content view to activity main. So this will tie our activity to our main layout. And then this one will tie our fragment to this fragment layout and put our fragment layout inside the main layout. So we'll have our fragment inside our main layout. When you run this, it should look the same. Let's see, do I have an emulator up and running. Let's run this on the emulator. So again, all we get is it starts up our main activity, and then it starts up our main fragment and sticks our main fragment inside our main activity. Boy, that was exciting. So let's try to start up create another fragment and work with that. So I'm going to right-click on App and do New Fragment. And I'm just going to do a blank fragment to get started here. So you can go up to File, New Fragment, Blank Fragment, or right-click here and do New Fragment, Blank Fragment. Any of those. I just need to create a new fragment for this. I'm going to call this fragment 2. And again, it's going to create the code fragment 2, and then the layout. The layout file is going to be called fragment 2 here. So I can just say, and then main, this is where it's where it will run when we start up that fragment. We could do this changes of code, but by default it'll be set up to run in the main XML file there. So I'm just going to hit finish. Now you should now see two XML files. You may have to refresh this to see these. You should see another XML file and then another Java file. So what it did here is it pulled this fragment file from within the main Java file into its own. So it pulled it into its own fragment file. That's called fragment2.java. And again, we could just stick that code back up and make it a subclass of this main Act2 fragment one. By default, it sets it in here as a separate fragment file. Let's look at the XML for it. So open up fragment2.xml. Hello, blank fragment. We're going to add another text widget here called fragment2. For some reason I didn't notice this fragment2 created a frame layout. We haven't used that layout much. Yeah, so again, when I'm moving things around, it's not a relative layout where I can just move things relative. It has a a frame here, and you can stick it in one of the quadrants, basically. Say align center left, align center right, do things like that. So just so you know, that's not anything to do with this fragment. It's just the fact that when the fragment was created, I didn't notice, but it set it to frame layout rather than relative layout. So if we switch this to a relative layout, it would be like what we're used to here. Okay, so I've got my fragment2 here, so I can display my fragment. Now let's try to go from one fragment to another. I'm bringing up some sample source code so I can show you what's all right. So let's try to set a button that will switch to this, bring in the second fragment we have for. So I'm going to go, let's go into the main, again, now if we want to change things or add things, we don't want to add them to the main layout. That should be made empty. We should modify them to the fragment layout. So I'm going to go to fragment main, and we're going to add a button here, and when that button's clicked, we'll go to the other fragment. Okay, so I'm in fragment 1, or I mean the main fragment.xml file, and I'm going to drop a button in here. That'll switch fragments. Now, I'm going to put some code for that, and I'm going to put that code in the fragment1 file for Java, not in main, but in fragment. So again, what we'll see is that most of our Java code is taken out of the main activity and put in the fragment Java files. And again, most of our layout widgets are no longer going to be in the main one, but in our activity, our fragment layouts.
I guess what I'm confused about is what is the point of a fragment? Like, why do we do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, it used to be like if you had your phone, you would have a layout for your phone, and then you had your tablet, you'd have your layout for your tablet, but you might have a couple layouts here, 2 screens, 2 different activities, and your tablet, you'd want all that combined into one. In the old way, if you're using XML layout things, you can't do that because you just have, you'd have to have different layouts and different you have to create actually different layouts and whole different activities and duplicate the code basically for that in the old days. So they made fragments as a way of saying, okay, we're going to take a small layout and some code for that layout, and we're going to say, so you can say put this fragment on the screen, and then the next fragment on the other screen if it's this layout, or we can say put both these fragments on the screen at the same time. And so the main activity is just going to be pulling fragments and saying run this activity here or switch to this fragment, and our fragments will have more of our code.
So your fragments kind of breaking up a little bit? Breaking
up into chunks, and then we can take those chunks and we can put multiple chunks together on the same screen if we want, or we can spread them out into different chunks if our screen isn't big enough. And like I say, one of the interfaces now is this swipe interface where you bring up one screen and then you can just swipe and it'll bring up another screen. So those will be different fragments. We'll swipe to a different fragment and we'll swipe back to different fragments. So we might have a single activity with multiple fragments in that it'll run or control. I don't really like fragments that much. It seems like they are added complexity. They add some features to this, and they let you do some cool stuff, but they are kind of a pain. What were you saying? Yeah.
Is that a fragment right there? I tried to do it. 2 screens combined right there.
Yeah. So that so like if you run apps like a music selection, you might have a fragment that shows all of your music. And then you might have another fragment to say what's playing now, or something like that, of the thing. And if you're on a phone, you might just bring up the list of everything in your music library. Click on something, it'll go to that one thing. Oops. Sorry, wrong number. I dialed this accidentally. Yep, fine. I dialed. I have to figure that out. I lock my phone, but it still allows me to dial 911 out of my pocket. I dial 911 all the time. I'm going, that's the one thing I don't want to dial. So at least it doesn't use the campus. Have you ever dialed 911 on campus? So don't ever dial. Well, they monitor. 911 goes through the operators and stuff. It's flagged as it goes out of campus. So I just called 911 from my office one day because I just report something. I forget what it was, and 5 minutes later, I had the head of security in my office going, "What's wrong? You dialed 911." I was just calling the 911 operators to tell them this, So to check on it, there was nothing. So I was impressed. 911 is very, very extensive on campus. Okay, so fragments. You can run these fragments, and you can have different fragments inside of things. So again, when you're swiping back and forth, those will be done with fragments and activities. couple years ago, we didn't use the fragments we knew, but now almost all the interfaces, all the cool interfaces and stuff are built with fragments. And what you'll tend to see is in main activity set up with fragments already created, and we'll just put code in here, and we really won't even touch the main activity much. So they're easier to use than they used to be because of this interface. Okay, so I put a button here. I want to put in some code for that button, and so I'm going to do this. Now this is my main fragment, so I'm going to go into the main. I'm going to go inside main.java. I'm going to go inside the fragment one, or no, it's actually called, let's rename this, right? This is called placeholder fragment. So we'll go inside the placeholder fragment, and we'll create an on-click method here. So I'm going to create a on-click method here, and I'm going to tie that in my XML file to run this. So. What am I not doing right on the on-click method? Do I have one out here? Is it supposed to be returning a view or a void? I thought it was public void on click and with a single parameter void view. But when I go in here, I should see that as an on-click method. I'm not seeing that. See what I have. I'm missing something. I'm not remembering something here to get this fragment in a button. Let me just look up that. Oh, I think that's what I'm seeing. So we used to be able to do this simple way where we just define a method here. But again, we can't put it inside our fragment if we want this to run, and I want this to be inside our fragment. So I'm going to change over to, so why don't you Google, you want to probably find this code. Google like Android button fragment on click, and either of the top two Stack Overflow links will give you the code you want for this. I'll put it up here. You can retype it, but again, I'm just going to grab it from this. So I just Googled Android button fragment on click. So this is the code I'm putting in between. So inside my fragment code, I had a view. I created a new view called root view and inflated that, and then I returned that root view. So the return ends my on create method here. So I don't want to put anything after that. It wouldn't work. Nothing would happen. So I have to put it before the return, but after I create this inflation, this inflator. So again, my code's going right in here for processing my button click. So, and I'm going to import button. That'll help. Import on click listener. And here I want to make sure, sometimes you have to watch what class you import. I don't want the Android content dialog. I don't know what that is. I want the Android view. I'm inside a view.on click listener. I'm going to set that up right. And then again, I've got to tie in to my button view here. And what was my button called? I'm going to rename my button. Okay, so I went and renamed my button, switch fragments. So now hopefully I can go in here and say .id.btn switch fragments. So this is how I should be set up. I should be creating a view called root view. That should have been the code in there by default. I'm going to say button, button, and I'm going to say, now usually we say view.find view by ID because our view is called view, but in my fragment up here the code automatically called it root view. So you either have to change this back to view or else use root view. I'm just going to use root view because that was the view created. Because if you remember, like in our normal class, the view is, oh, we didn't even create it there. In a normal thing, we create a view called view and manipulate that in the main activity. And here it's called root view. So again, root view, inflator, inflate, fragment, that's already set. So my button, I'm going to say root view.find view by ID because that's my view object. And r.id. Whatever ID you gave the button. So in my fragment, I named my button btn switch fragments. So I'm going to use that same code here. And I do my button set on click listener. And I override the on click with the view, and then here's where I will actually do something. So one thing that really bothers me about Android, it just takes so long to set up buttons and stuff like that. I miss C# or even like in Eclipse where you could just double click on a button and it created the listener for you in the method. Okay, so So what are we going to do for this fragment? So we've got to grab a fragment manager. So I'm going to group together a bunch of calls rather than declaring variables for these things. I'm going to say get support fragment manager dot begin transaction dot, and I'm going to add the fragment. Add, and let's see, add has to take the fragment and the string. So let's see, I've got to do this. Yeah. So I can just grab the code that I used to create the fragment above and kind of duplicate that down here. I'm going to get the support fragment, call begin transaction, and do add, and then do my fragment 2 here. This isn't working right. I'm just trying to figure out. Okay. I'm going to try to shorten this up. You'll sometimes see this notation here in Java where they'll, rather than creating a variable, a fragment manager variable, you'd create a variable and then you'd say like get fragment manager to initialize that variable, and then with that variable you'd call begin transaction, and then with that variable you'd call add, and then you'd call commit. Rather than creating a variable for that, sometimes you'll see this code like this where you say get the support fragment manager dot transaction, and they usually do it on a separate line, dot add dot commit. So all these dots are like using the same thing that was returned from your fragment mirror. This get support fragment manager, call this and this and this, call these three methods with this same object, but they don't declare a variable with that. So I'm kind of, that's not working here, so I'm trying to redo this here, and I thought I had the code right here. It's close. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to create a new fragment. So we have our fragment 2 here, and so I'm just going to say new fragment 2 and declare a variable called f2 with that, and then I'm going to start that fragment up with the fragment manager. And I'm not sure why I'm not. I'll have to look at this. I'm just not getting the fragment manager here. I've done something wrong here. So why don't we just pause here? I'll figure this out, and Wednesday I'll show you the code for the button. So yes, 2 classes in a row. I keep wanting to come. So. Okay, are you guys doing something for Community Day? You're what?
Teaching my friend important things.
Your friend important things. Okay. Okay. So Wednesday will not be doing this. So Friday I'll show you how to do this, and we'll do an in-class activity Friday with using fragments. I think we'll probably switch and use one of these more complicated interfaces and get that up and running. So new on-click listener.
Is it missing the other one? What's the other closing bracket for that? Because you don't have it, but it still works for you.
Yeah. This closes down here.
Oh, yeah.
You've got that.
Yeah.
On-click listener.
Oh, you can pull that in a second.
Here, can I look? Oh, there's this.
Hold on. Let me just check it quick. Two seconds.
Yes, it is here.
I don't even think I imported. Maybe did you get an import wrong? Android widget button. You should just have Android widget button and view. Yeah, you should be importing view up above, right? Scroll up and look at your imports. Yeah, view and button. Yep, widget button. So those are the right imports. So go back down there. What is?
Does it have to do with something with here?
No, oh, I don't think so, because there's no, we don't reference the name of that fragment. Down here, this fragment 2's got to match that, name there, but you have that. On-click listener. Okay, let me just stop this recording and I'll take a look at that some more. So.
Hey Tom, that flashlight, remember, I'm thinking this stuff will enjoy.